So hospitality is our actions of welcoming and caring for others, especially strangers or those who are in need. And it is a fundamental aspect of our Christian faith and practice, and is deeply rooted in the techniques of Jesus. There are several scriptures regarding hospitality. Just a few examples of them are Isaiah 58:7. Is it not to share your food with the hungry, to provide the poor wanderer with shelter, when you see the naked, to clothe them, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? Titus 1:8. Rather, he must be hospitable, one who loves what is good, who is self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. 1 Peter 4:8-9. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Leviticus 19:33-34. When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. However, probably the most well-known passage can be found in Matthew chapter 25. This reading comes from verses 31-40. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Hospitality is one of the key ways in which we can express our love for God and our love for others. It is a practice that is essential to both building and maintaining relationships, and it is a way of showing respect and kindness to those around us. Hospitality is not just about inviting people into our homes, although that certainly is an important part of it. It is about creating an atmosphere of warmth, acceptance, and generosity wherever we are. It's about treating everyone we meet as if they were Jesus himself. Again, Matthew 25:40. Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of these, the least of my brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Now, is hospitality always an easy thing for us to accomplish? No, it's not. It often requires us to be vulnerable, which we're going to discuss in a later workshop, to open ourselves up to others, and to be willing to put their needs before our own. It requires us to be patient, to listen carefully, and to be willing to learn from them. It also requires us to be willing to challenge our own assumptions and biases and to be open to new ways of thinking and being. Diana Groover, in a 2016 blog post she wrote on hospitality, says, "I sometimes joke that I have the spiritual gift of feeding people. And it's true that more times than not, entering our home will result in some sort of edibles placed before you. It's the way Scott and I are wired, to have people into our home and, of course, to feed them. But is hospitality for everyone, or just for those of us who find it an enjoyable part of our calling? Some fall into the trap of thinking they can't be hospitable because their home isn't clean enough, big enough, or they aren't a good enough cook. Others become crippled by a combination of perfectionism, pride, and comparison, concerned about not measuring up to the standard of others. Hospitality, though, is about much more than good food and a nice house, in spite of its typical portrayal. Hospitality is not about what is provided as much as how it is provided, safe and a warm space. Hospitality is about expressing the welcoming love of Christ to others, both friends and strangers. So the most lavish banquet and the best decorated of homes could express little of the biblical sense of hospitality based on the attitude of the host, but simple bread and water could incarnate the welcome of Christ himself. The entire concept of hospitality being simple that Groover talks about, to me, is almost radical. Too many times we think we have to be a Martha Stewart or put out a spread like we're welcoming dignitaries to the White House. It is not necessarily about what we have to offer, but the attitude in which it is offered. We can welcome people to our homes and our church, but if the attitude is cold and stiff, is there really any hospitality? If the feeling people receive is that they're not really welcomed, that I'm smiling at you out of obligation, yeah, I like you really, rather than a place of compassion, is that really hospitality? Hospitality is best served with a cup of warm soup. Rosaria Butterfield, who shared the incredible story of her conversion from radical feminism to a life with Jesus through the hospitality of Christian, writes in her book, The Gospel Comes with a House Key, practicing a radically ordinary hospitality is your street credibility with your post-Christian neighbors. In post-Christian communities, your words can be only as strong as your relationships. Your best weapon is an open door, a set table, a fresh pot of coffee, and a box of Kleenex for the tears that spill. Why is hospitality so important that we chose to add it to our conversations this week? Well, according to a 2022 article from the Pew Research Center on the changing religious demographics, they say Pew Research Center has been measuring religious identity since 2007, using a slightly different question wording of what is your present religion, if any, as well as a different set of response options. Since 2007, the percentage of adults who say they are atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular in the center's surveys has grown from 16 to 29%. During this time, the share of U.S. adults who identify as Christian has fallen from 78% to 63%. In an increasingly post-Christian world, radical hospitality is how we show our love for others by following the commands of Christ. Love God with all that we are, all that we have, and love our neighbors as ourselves. Is this challenging? Sure. It certainly can be. But despite the challenges that may arise, hospitality is deeply rewarding. It can bring us closer to God and to others, and it can help us to grow in faith and in love. It can also help break down barriers between people, whether that is different cultures, different races, backgrounds. It can help build bridges of understanding and compassion. Henry Nouwen says it well. Hospitality is not to change people, but to offer them space where change can take place. The paradox of hospitality is that it wants to create emptiness, not a fearful emptiness, but a friendly emptiness where strangers can enter and discover themselves as created free, not a subtle invitation to adopt the lifestyle of the host, but the gift of a chance for the guest to find his own. I wanted to share with you a personal story about hospitality that radically changed my life. I was pastoring at the time and had been in the parking lot speaking with one of the ladies from my congregation. A young man walked around the corner of the building. Now, this young man had come to my home a couple of times over the past previous years. He usually was stopping by to ask me for money. I had inquired the local pastoral group about this young man, and he was well known in the community. Many churches have helped him through the years. I always invited him to come to church, and he would just smile and nod and say something like, "Well, I will certainly try." Although I knew he wouldn't, that was okay, at least I tried. Today's story was different. He introduced me to his wife, a tiny little blonde-haired, blue-eyed young woman who was either in recovery from meth or was perhaps still using. I wasn't really sure, since she had all the telltale signs of a user. The young man said to me, "Miss Becky, my wife and I are really hungry. We would appreciate a meal." Now, this was a new request for me. Dinner? I shot a look at my congregant, and I could tell that she was not really impressed with the thought. She was standing beside me going. I told the young man and his wife to wait here a moment, let me walk back to my house to see if I had any cash on me. I lived at the back of the church property, which gave me a few precious minutes of much-needed prayer. Asking, "Lord, what do you want me to do?" I heard my answer. So I grabbed my wallet, jumped in my vehicle, drove back over, and said, "Hop in. We're going to go get something to eat." Now, the woman from my congregation, whom I knew really well, was giving me eyeballs like I had absolutely lost my mind. And to be honest, I couldn't tell you that I wasn't thinking the same thing. I mean, I didn't really know these people at all, and it could have ended up really bad. But God spoke, and I had to listen. So my intention was to drive across the street to Cracker Barrel, go in, put some money down for a meal, and let them enjoy their dinner. But as I pulled into my parking space and I was running this scenario through my mind, God spoke to me again. So again, I listened. The three of us went inside for a dinner meal that we would share together. As we sat there, us three, and I'm really going to try not to cry. Several things began to play out before me. One, I noticed that when you share a meal with people who don't fit into the standards of society that most people at Cracker Barrel are accustomed to, you get a lot of eyeballs on your table. Two, this also includes several passes by the on-duty manager. Three, when you have a meal with people, conversation just happens. And you learn things about people that you could not have possibly understood previously. Things like, this young man never finished school. He came from an extremely rough family and he didn't have a fighting chance. Things like, because he didn't finish school, he never learned how to read, which would make it really difficult to order something from a menu. So out of kindness, you read the menu to him so that he could make his meal choice. Things like the young wife's been sober for 2 months and how her kids are in foster care and she's trying really hard to get them back. Things like, she reads her Bible to her husband every night, and she loves to read her Bible. Things like, they'd gone to a couple churches in the area, but they were always asked to leave. Things that made me stop and think about my own path, my own choices, my own opportunities, and how if I had made a different choice, would I be any different than they are now? That meal ended with me driving them to their home, a ratty old trailer, not fit for anyone. And in my opinion, they were paying a whole lot too much for. And I left them there that night with their leftovers that would soon be consumed because they had no electricity, which meant no refrigeration, which also meant no heat or air, no running water. You see, they didn't have enough money to pay the deposit to get the utilities turned on. I turned my vehicle around. I drove to the other side of town where my lights were on, waiting to welcome me home in my warm house with my running water. This encounter of hospitality, which I will argue with anyone was more of a gift and a lesson for me than it was for this young couple, absolutely changed my life. And it changed how I look at hospitality. So how can we practice hospitality in our daily lives? Here's a few ideas. Welcome others into your home. This could be inviting friends, family, or even strangers to just spend a meal and spend time together. Be welcoming wherever we are, whether we're at work, at school, local community. We can create an atmosphere of warmth and acceptance by greeting others with a smile and taking the time to truly listen to their stories, not just hear them. Be open to new experiences. Hospitality often involves stepping out of your comfort zones, trying new things. We can be open to new ideas, new cultures, new ways of thinking, and be willing to learn from others. Serve others. Hospitality is not just about receiving guests, but also about serving them. We can look for ways to meet the needs of others, whether that means volunteering at a local charity, helping a neighbor in need, or simply being there for a friend who is going through a difficult time. Pray for and pray with others. We can practice hospitality by praying for others and with others, especially those who are in need. We can all lift up our friends, family, and neighbors together in prayer, asking God to bless them and help them through their struggles. Other ideas I found were in the Spiritual Disciplines Handbook by Adele Calhoun, and she shares some ideas to encourage hospitality, like host an exchange student or someone coming in from out of town. I really liked this one. Host a craving potluck. Ask people to bring something they crave, and don't try to make it perfect. Ladies, we're terrible about trying to make sure that all 5 food groups are covered at potlucks. Who cares? We're gonna eat, okay? How about a leftover gathering, where people just simply bring what leftovers they have available in their refrigerator? Create a standard list of conversation questions. Questions that will put people at ease and invite people to open up to each other. Hospitality does not need to be a total Martha Stewart makeover, although it can be. Hospitality is about opening up and welcoming others in. John chapter 13, 33 through 35 says, "My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now. Where I'm going, you cannot come. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." So now we're going to transition into a time of sharing about hospitality. I'd like us to take a few minutes and share about things that maybe you're already doing in your home or your church, What are some things that you think you could implement, and what would it look like to create a hospitality environment for your community?